toward this question of plants, compounds, drugs. Should these things be used for spiritual growth? If the answer is no, then that finishes. You don't have to go any further. If the answer is maybe or yes, then other questions arise. Which compounds out of this whole survey, and at what frequency, and at what dosage, and under what circumstances? And over the years, I've sort of evolved a three-way test that I will share with you, because I think it's maybe operationally the most useful thing you'll hear this weekend. And that is, if you are contemplating some compound, some plant, then the first thing to ask yourself is, does it occur in nature? Does it have some tangentiality to what is already existing? Because obviously what exists, that's nature, has undergone some vast winnowing process out of the set of all things which might exist. In that wonderful phrase of Alfred North Whitehead's, certain things have undergone the formality of actually occurring. You know, and so certain compounds have undergone the formality of actually occurring in the biological matrix, and so they should be our pool out of which our experimental compound should be drawn. But this is thousands of compounds. How can we further narrow it? Well, an excellent way of narrowing it further is to ask the question of this compound: does it have a history of human usage? Does it have a history of human usage? That is your FDA approval. Because if you can point to a tribe of people who have been taking this plant or mushroom or whatever it is for millennia, and they don't have miscarriages, tumors, cataracts, blindness, Down syndrome, 8 fingers on the left hand, or whatever it is, then you can be fairly confident that this thing is benign, that these people have observed its action on pregnant women, the elderly, those with, and that it has passed that test. Then, finally, the narrowest gate through which a compound has to go to intersect my precious body is it has to have an affinity to ordinary brain chemistry. It has to have an affinity to ordinary brain chemistry. We don't want to launch something on your brain that it can't recognize at all, that it has no biosynthetic pathways to degrade, that it has no receptors for just some crazy thing, 5-amino-3-triethylphenthioanaxidine or something. We don't want that. That's not the spirit that we're acting in here. So if the compound can get through those 3 barriers, then it's an excellent candidate for providing spiritual gain at low physiological impact. Well, now some people may say, oh, well, you've taken all the fun out of it. All the good things have been tossed aside in this mad rush to purity or something. Not at all. The very best stuff was retained in this process because in terms of relative strength and bizarreness of effect and so forth, the strangest, the most powerful, the most transformative of all hallucinogens in nature or out is dimethyltryptamine, DMT. And it's worth talking about DMT for a moment because it will raise certain issues and distinctions that you may not have been aware of. First of all, DMT is hands down the most powerful of all hallucinogens. I mean, it is so powerful that whatever's in second place is lost over the horizon. Yet, it is the most benign of all hallucinogens because it occurs as an endogenous neurotransmitter in the normal human brain. Every single one of us at this moment have N,N-dimethyltryptamine being synthesized, activated, and degraded in our synaptic membrane. So this is almost a paradox. The most benign of all hallucinogens, the most fast-acting, I should also add, is also the most harmless, the easiest to take. It sort of puts a certain obligation on the experient because there is no reason to hold back except that there is this question, does it drive you mad? And then the more serious version of that question, what about the possibility of death by astonishment? This is no joke. Death by astonishment is, I think, probably the major risk we run with this stuff because the impact of the breakthrough is so total, so complete, so unexpected. And in a way, this sort of brings me back around to my theme because I encountered DMT, LSD, all of these things in that very period when I was getting set to take flight as a Jungian analyst. And what completely blew my mind about DMT, and I mention it again, here's an opportunity for research, is how here's a heretical construction, how trans-archetypal the content of the flash seemed. I was appalled because not only had I a certain amount of interest in Jung and proclivity along those lines, but my original major had been art history. Art historians, what we're trained to do is to be able to look at a motif and say, oh yes, I'm familiar with this from ceramic from second millennia Peru and also Mandaean embroidery work. We know motifs. We're trained to recognize and connect disparate aesthetic domains. Well, when I smoked DMT and came down, I said, this is not on the map. I can't believe it. This doesn't connect up to anything. How can there be domains of the human mind that do not announce themselves in folklore, fairy tales, dreams, or mandala painting, that are so removed from the ven of what is human that they are apparently not accessible in structuring our maps of ourself and our psyche. And that for me was the contact with what I call, and I didn't call it this, Rudolf Otto called it this, and this term influenced Jung, Otto preceded Jung, it is the wholly other. And if there is an archetype of the wholly other, then this is it. But perhaps the wholly other transcends the archetypes. This may explain to some degree Jung's interest in Gnosticism, especially the Valentinian school of Gnosticism, which holds, that there is a higher and hidden Father, all God, who is outside the machinery of cosmic fate. And it seemed to me that in those extremely profound DMT flashes, I was actually witnessing a domain outside the machinery of the archetypes, which is, for us as moderns, that's what the machinery of fate is. It's not zodiacal machinery, it's hardwiring in our psychology and our genes that gives us our fate. Well, so having said that, I've not only made the survey, but also brought us to, by ending with DMT, the subject matter of this quest. And I want to make it clear, I speak about the power of the psychedelic experience because I think people should be informed of their birthright. And I feel very antsy around the notion that someone might go from birth to the grave without ever having a psychedelic experience. It makes me as antsy as the notion that somebody might go from birth to the grave without having a sexual experience. It's a strange kind of protective denial, or a kind of expression of fear. This is our birthright. This is part of what it means to be human. These altered states of consciousness, I think, are pretty much scripted into the existence of women, because most of them will give birth, which is an organically scripted psychedelic experience from which there is no escape, unless, of course, you go for the drug knockout, the spinal, and then you miss everything. But biologically, physiologically, women are set up for this experience. Men are not. It's possible to build such barriers against overwhelmment that it never happens in your whole life. And I believe that if we psychologically analyze the effects of these psychedelics, what they do is they dissolve boundaries. That's all. I mean, if you interview 10,000 people who've had a psychedelic trip, each one has their own hierophany, their own hieroskamos that unfolded for them, but the sum total of it is boundaries dissolve, and then whatever's on the other side of your boundary comes flooding in to claim you and to reshape and remake your psyche. Well, I see the entire illness of our civilization as an ego-inflationary illness. We have gone so sick with ego that we are literally murdering the planet rather than confronting the consequences of our psychic imbalance. And